Um, well, it was a pretty typical preliminary hearing in that you have a lot of testimony, and it doesn't come from maybe actual witnesses, but it is testimony that comes through officers and some statements from the defendants themselves through testimony of the officers.
Some of the most damning testimony against Mr. Reese appeared to be coming from the two other people that were charged for murder, at least from testimony that they had given to police, according to your witness. Is there right now, are they, it sounds like they have been cooperating. Is that going to affect their cases moving forward as you also continue the case against Mr. Reese?
Well, I can't really speak to who's cooperating and who's not. I can say that there's aspects of this case that are still being investigated, and there will be time in the future to where certain people that have been charged in this may come forward with more information.
We'd heard the information now that there appeared, according to witnesses that spoke to police, a relationship between Reese and Hawkins. For all this time, we had no idea of what the motive was. Your thoughts on that and that information now that is out there?
I really can't speak to that. Obviously, anything you heard in the courtroom, is open, but I can't really speak to that. The bar rules don't allow me to do that, and I don't think it would be appropriate to speculate on motives. And I'd caution the media about things like that, because a lot of times people can jump to conclusions on cases, and until it comes out in the courtroom, it might be better to leave it alone.
Can you expand any on the possible relationship that Adam Reese had with this Daphne Webb?
I could expound on it, but I'm not.
Okay.
But based on what the chief said today, it appeared Reese had a relationship with Hawkins and his mother.
Well, obviously, you can deduce whatever you heard from the witness stand, but I can't really speculate on that. I know a good bit about all of what was said, but I'm not going to speculate on what it may mean for the case.
How important was Facebook in playing a role in this? We had seen that there was mentioned on both sides of the defense and in some of your questioning there about Facebook conversations that had been taking place.
One of the new areas dealing with law enforcement, and I think we may be a little behind the times in Alabama, but is electronics, whether it be social media that just about everybody's using. It plays a part in almost all cases now to some extent. I think in this case it's obvious from what you could hear in the courtroom that it did play a part in some of the things that happened here. I would hope that one of the things the state legislature would talk about would be for funding for law enforcement to be able to get into these areas more. And I know that's maybe not a popular thing to talk about for Montgomery, but I think it's something that we've got to do if we're going to be effective in this century, in this state for criminal justice.
When you say get into it more, what do you mean exactly?
Well, I think, right now the state legislature has been, I think, antagonistic towards law enforcement and the funding of law enforcement and laws involving law enforcement. I think things like this would be a very positive thing to do, which would be to try to help law enforcement in these areas, provide funding, provide forensic science funding that basically has been cut terribly in the last few years. This is an area that is a real fruitful area for law enforcement dealing with social media. I think this case illustrates that.
A lot of the testimony seemed to focus in regards to the house the day afterwards and some of the testimony that the police had gotten from Tessa Wise. You guys have charged her with lying to police. How confident are you that she was ultimately telling you the truth?
I can't really comment on anything outside of what you heard in the courtroom today. This thing is ongoing. There's still aspects of the case that's being actively investigated. Each of the people that you've mentioned, this one in particular, is represented by counsel, and hopefully there'll be some areas that we'll explore with their counsel.
How confident are you in this case against these three murder suspects?
I'm very confident about it.
We had heard that there was still some forensic testing involving the car that was found. Any idea about that process, how long that could take? I know that was one of the things the defense tried to kind of punch a hole in, was the fact that there wasn't any as of yet.
And I know most of the people I see here with the media today are younger, but I go back into the mid-'80s with doing this kind of work. There was a time when Alabama Department of Forensic Science would actually do testing, come to scenes and help you with gathering of evidence. They no longer do that. There's not enough funding for them to do that. We've had not only to ask them for some help, but we've had to ask outside groups for helping scientific evidence in this case. And it may take a while to get some of that back.
Andy, I know it's tough to speculate. Are we talking months that it could possibly take for that to happen?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I think most of y'all are aware, just on random, just a drug test now on narcotics takes sometimes up to a year to a year and a half. I've got cases that where just controlled substances have taken 18 months to 2 years to get back.
And to that end, talking about how long this could take, this goes to a grand jury now that has to hear the benefits and whether or not we get a true bill on this. How long could it be before we actually know what comes of what happened in the courtroom today?
I would expect sort of a timetable, I guess that's what the question is,
Yeah.
that hopefully before the end of the year, the case will be presented to a grand jury. The judge today bound the case over for a grand jury proceeding. There will be a lot of things that happen between now and then that you've alluded to, such as the gathering of evidence, the testing of evidence. But I would think that hopefully by the end of the year, there will be a grand jury proceeding. And then, you know, if everything goes well, then maybe sometime next year, we'll get some of these cases to trial.
Reese's attorney said no DNA, no fingerprint evidence for Reese. Can you respond to that? How confident are you in the case against Reese?
It's a little premature for anybody to say something like that.
You admit, can we explain kind of where we are with bond right now? I know that it sounded, correct me if I'm wrong, that there was like a continuance. I guess it was going to be discussed at a later point. Is that accurate, or how would you describe what's going on there?
Well, I think the defendants each have their own, I guess, argument as to what the bond should be, or they'll have their own timetable of when they want to push that. Some of their arguments may be stronger than others, but we'll be prepared whenever the judge wants to set that. We believe the bonds are appropriate in this case for what's happened.
Obviously, a critical day, you know, getting it to a grand jury. How important is that?
Well, that's I think, probably the most critical part of the case is when a case goes to the grand jury, because that's the first time a group of citizens get to hear the evidence in the case. So obviously, grand jury for a prosecutor, I think, is the most important step. And I think for the citizens of a county, it's probably the most important step.
What happens with the other suspects? Do they have a date coming up, or?
You talking about the other people charged other than the
Yes,
ones
sir.
today? Yeah, there'll be some dates for them to have preliminary hearings, or there may be some negotiations between, you know, the attorneys, my office and the attorneys involved about what may or may not happen in their cases.
Okay. I think you made it pretty clear, but I mean, what evidence would you kind of say to try to get this to a grand jury?
I'm not really understanding your question.
Okay. I guess did you presented any information just as far as to try to present your case?
Well, all legally competent evidence that we have will be presented at the appropriate time to a grand jury.
Can you explain in this preliminary hearing, by and large as a practice, you're trying to get the you know, sent to a grand jury probable cause. That doesn't necessarily mean that all of the evidence that you have
There's no doubt.
presented.
Preliminary hearing is merely to establish, is there probable cause to believe that there's enough evidence for this case to proceed to the next step? Whether it be from the defendant's perspective or our perspective, there's a lot more things out there that will be considered in the future. So this was, that's when I led off saying this is a fairly typical preliminary hearing into how it transpired and sort of what happens. You know, the defense always uses it as an opportunity to try to find out as much as they can about the state's case. You know, the state wants to put enough evidence on to make sure the judge binds it over. And if bond is talked about, that there's enough evidence, the judge can make an appropriate decision about bond.